Hello, my name is Anya Ovchinnikova, and I'm the project manager for NADAC, the National Archive of Data on Arts and Culture. Also here with me today is the NADAC director, Dr. Lynette Holter. It's our pleasure to welcome you to this webinar, Analyzing Data on Arts and Culture in Large-Scale Health, Education, and Labor Studies. I will now introduce our presenters. Melissa Menzer. Dr. Menzer is a Senior Program Analyst in the Office of Research and Analysis at the National Endowment for the Arts. Jennifer Novak-Leonard. Dr. Novak-Leonard is a Research Associate Professor and Research Director of the Arts Impact Initiative in the College of Fine and Applied Arts at the University of Illinois. She also serves as the Research Director and Board Vice President for SNAAP, the Strategic National Arts Alumni Project. Karen Mack. Dr. Mack is a Senior Research Fellow at the University College London, Department of Behavioral Science and Health, and at the World Health Organization Collaborating Center on Arts and Health. And Ken Elpus. Dr. Elpus is a Professor of Music Education and Associate Director for Faculty Affairs and Graduate Studies at the University of Maryland, School of Music. Okay. Let's take a quick look at our plan for today's webinar. Bear with me a second. We'll start with an overview of the NEA Research Awards programs and research priorities presented by Dr. Menzer, followed by the presentations showcasing 3 NEA-funded research projects that work with large-scale arts data. First, Dr. Novak-Leonard will present on her work related to the Strategic National Arts Alumni Project and other surveys developed under her previous NEA Research Lab Award. Then Dr. Mack will talk about her research based on the health and retirement study data. Finally, Dr. Elpus will speak about his work related to the National Center for Education Statistics datasets from the Department of Education. After these presentations, we'll return to Dr. Menzer, who will lead a panel discussion. At the end, we'll be happy to take your questions, but again, please feel free to type in questions at any time in Q&A box. I will now turn the presentation over to Dr. Menzer, who will give an overview of the NEA Research Awards programs.
Great. Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for the opportunity to share about funding opportunities here at the National Endowment for the Arts. As Anya introduced earlier, I'm Melissa Menzer, and I'm a program analyst in the Office of Research and Analysis at the National Endowment for the Arts. And so in this presentation, we'll overview the National Endowment for the Arts, our research funding programs, and some of the research resources that we have. Next slide, please. So first, I want to share a little bit about the NEA. It is an independent federal agency in the United States. By advancing equitable opportunities for arts participation and practice, we at the NEA foster and sustain an environment in which the arts benefit everyone in the United States. Our primary activities include grant making to nonprofit arts organizations, public arts agencies and organizations, and individual writers and translators. And the NEA funding is appropriated by Congress annually. Across all of our programs, we direct over 2,000 grants each year that support our mission and goals to organizations of all sizes across all 50 states and 6 U.S. territories. Next slide, please. We released a research agenda back in 2021. This agenda outlines key research topics and sample questions that will guide our investments over the next few years. And there are 4 broad questions or new research priorities for our programs. So question 1 asks, what are the measurable impacts of the arts on outcomes such as the U.S. economic growth and or innovation, cognition and learning, and health and wellness for individuals? Question 2 asks, in what ways do the arts contribute to the healing and revitalization of communities? Number 3, what is the state of diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility in the arts? And number 4, how is the U.S. arts ecosystem adapting and responding to social, economic, and technological changes and challenges to the sector? And so by arts ecosystem, we mean organizations and venues, artists and arts workers, and participants and learners. So each of these questions on this slide is described further in detail in our research agenda document, which I strongly urge you to consult online, especially if you're interested in applying for funding from the NEA. It lists several subtopics or sample questions for consideration. Next slide, please. So as previously mentioned, the 4 priority research topics will guide our investments over the next few years. The primary vehicle for addressing these new priorities will be the Research Grants in the Arts program, as well as the NEA Research Labs program, which allow for the design and conduct of studies grounded in the social and behavioral sciences. So first, Research Grants in the Arts funds research studies that investigate the value and or the impact of the arts, either as individual components of the U.S. arts ecology, or as they interact with each other and or with other domains of American life. The NEA Research Labs program, on the other hand, funds transdisciplinary research teams grounded in the social and behavioral sciences, yielding empirical insights about the arts for the benefit of arts and non-art sectors alike. Next slide, please. So applications to research grants in the arts are open to both new and returning applicants. In order to be eligible to apply, the organization must be in the United States and be a 501c3 nonprofit organization, a unit of state or local government, or federally recognized tribes or tribal communities. And this may include, but is not limited to, colleges and universities. Applicants must have completed a 3-year operating history by the application deadline and must be in compliance with reporting requirements for any previous NEA lab award, or excuse me, any previous NEA award. So research grants in the arts funding, next slide, please. Okay. Research grants in the arts funding requests may range from $20,000 to $100,000, depending on the project, and do require a non-federal one-to-one cost share. So for projects that intend solely to use pre-existing data and that will not involve primary data collection as part of the project activities, such as data sets cataloged in NADAC, we anticipate making awards in the $20,000 to $50,000 range. But projects that include primary data collection as part of the research activities are eligible for awards between $20,000 and $100,000. Next slide, please. So here are a few examples of research grants in the arts projects that we've supported in the past that focus on data sets currently cataloged in NADAC. The first is to Arizona State University, where we supported a study that examined factors accounting for key transitions in the careers of arts graduates. This particular project used the dataset Strategic National Arts Alumni Project, which Dr. Jennifer Novak-Leonard will share more about shortly. We also made an award to Brookings Institute to support a study of the potential benefits of arts participation on individual well-being. This particular data set used the Survey for Public Participation in the Arts as well as other national surveys. And I think we'll hear a little bit more about the SPPA from perhaps Dr. Jennifer Novak and also Dr. Kenneth Elpus. And we also made an award to the University of Illinois at Chicago to support a study to examine the impact of arts exposure and artistic expression on U.S. civil society, including civic engagement and social tolerance. And this particular data set used the General Social Survey, also cataloged in NADAC. Next slide, please. So through our Research Labs program, we support transdisciplinary research partnerships grounded in the social and behavioral sciences to produce and report empirical insights about the arts for the benefit of arts and also non-art sectors such as healthcare, education, and business or management. Applicants are strongly urged to consult the agenda, the research agenda that I mentioned before, for detailed descriptions of each of the priority topic areas for related sample questions that we're interested in under this program. Next slide, please. NEA research labs are intended to serve as hubs or centers of excellence in the domain of interest. As a result, they're required to complete a number of activities under their lab award, such as developing a research agenda, conducting a keystone study and other studies, producing research reports and other products, and disseminating those reports, products, data, tools, or services for the public, researchers, and practitioners. Next slide, please. Eligible applicants are U.S. institutions of higher ed or education or nonprofit tax-exempt 501c3 U.S. organizations that specifically have a 3-year history in behavioral or social science research and communicating findings of that research. Unique to this program is that institutions that have received an NEA Research Lab Award as the lead applicant are no longer eligible to compete as a lead applicant through any future rounds that we have for this particular program, but they can partner with another institution that is eligible. And so for the sake of time, I won't go through our list of awardees, but a couple of them are in this room now. And you can find the full list of additional information about our labs on our NEA website. Next slide, please. There are a couple of additional application requirements to consider. The NEA Research Labs program requires a partnership that involves multiple organizations. At least one of those partnering organizations must be a nonprofit arts organization. And in addition, the project team must be interdisciplinary. Next slide, please. So NEA Research Labs awards are between $100,000 and $150,000 and require that one-to-one non-federal cost share or match at the time of the application. The initial award is expected to cover a 12-month to 24-month period of performance. And what's really unique about this particular program is that it allows for non-competitive subsequent awards of up to 4 times. So theoretically, a lab could be supported by the NEA for up to 10 years. I do want to say, though, renewals are not guaranteed and are dependent on funding availability, agency priorities, and a number of other factors. And more detail about the renewal options as well as other technical requirements, you can find all of that on our website in our guidelines. Next slide, please. So I'll share 3 examples of labs who are analyzing large-scale data sets under their lab award. Many of those data sets are included in NADAC. For the health sector, the EpiArts Lab at the University of Florida's Center for Arts in Medicine, led by Dr. Jill Sonke and in partnership with University College London, explores the relationship between arts and cultural engagement and population health outcomes. To date, the lab has created a data inventory of large-scale data sets that include its variables. Studies included here are the panel study of income dynamics, the general social survey, and the health and retirement survey, which you'll hear more about from Dr. Karen Mock later in the webinar, among other data sets. And thus far, the team has conducted more than 10 statistical analyses of those data sets with several papers either published or in review for publication. Next slide, please. And from the economics and entrepreneurship sector, the Arts, Entrepreneurship, and Innovation Lab at Indiana University, currently led by Dr. Doug Noonan, focuses on topics such as the role of artists in civic innovation, artists in new economies, such as crowdfunding patterns for artists, and where innovation and economic growth occurs in the digital media sector. Currently, they're conducting analyses using large-scale data sets focused on current conditions and recent trends in the artists' workforce, according to the U.S. Census Bureau data, the impact of the arts economy on the broader U.S. economy, and the ability of online platforms to foster creativity and arts entrepreneurship. And a couple of accomplishments, particularly around this particular lab, include a guest-edited special issue in 3 separate research journals, which basically spurred more than 20 articles authored by more than 35 scholars. In addition, the university has hosted a research symposium on entrepreneurship, innovation, and inequities in the arts ecosystem. Next slide, please. So one of our newer labs representing the education sector is a lab led by Dr. Ken Elpus at the University of Maryland. The Music and Arts Education Data Lab, or MAD Lab, is a national hub for the analysis of large-scale quantitative data on arts students, arts educators, and the ecosystem of arts education in the United States across multiple arts disciplines. Their keystone study includes creating and analyzing data from a national survey of arts educators, exploring the status and nature of arts education in public schools. The team will also analyze several large cohort longitudinal and publicly available data sets, such as those from the National Center of Education Statistics. And they'll also host a series of researcher and practitioner convenings, produce research reports, create applied tools with accompanying toolkits, and develop a pre-doctoral graduate research training program in the arts, music and arts education research. And I'm sure you'll hear more about that from Dr. Ken Elpus later on in the webinar. So now that we know a little bit more about the research programs we offer, next slide, please. I'd like to share some details about the mechanics of applying. So most of the NEA programs follow the same timeline from application to award notification. There's an application process that includes two parts, a short form that is submitted through grants.gov, and then the full application that is submitted through the NEA's applicant portal. And then there's a panel review process. Applications receive 3 levels of panel review. First is the citizen panel, which is made up of experts in the field. The panel is diverse in terms of geography, gender, race and ethnicity, as well as expertise. And panelists review applications based on the review criteria outlined in our guidelines, basically artistic excellence and artistic merit. Panel recommendations are then submitted to the National Council on the Arts for review and approval. And finally, the NEA chair signs the approved grants. Once the chair approves the recommendations, applicants are notified of their status, typically in November for the research awards programs. Next slide, please. Related to NEA grants, I do want to put in a plug to say that we're about to start the panel recruitment process for the deadline that just closed last month. Panelists would be required to read and evaluate grant applications for us. So this is the citizen panel component. And we're always looking for new voices to bring into this process. It's a great way to connect with us and to really learn about what the process is like from the other side. We've been told that it's a great professional development opportunity. And so if you're interested in volunteering to be a panelist for us, please do reach out. You can contact me directly, or you can sign up through the link that's on this slide. Okay, next slide, please. I also wanted to quickly share a little more about NADAC, or the National Archive of Data on Arts and Culture, which, as Anya mentioned, is a repository that facilitates research on arts and culture by acquiring data, particularly those funded by federal agencies and other organizations, and sharing that data with researchers, policymakers, people in the arts and cultural field, as well as the general public. We hope to release 2 new NEA datasets later this year, the first being the 2022 Survey of Public Participation in the Arts. This is an NEA-sponsored survey conducted as a supplement to the current population survey, which is part of which the Census Bureau conducts on behalf of the Bureau of Labor Statistics. The SPPA is the field's premier cross-sectional survey of individuals' attendance and involvement in arts and cultural activity in the United States. We've run this survey about every 5 years since 1982. The data are circulated to interested researchers, and they're the basis for a range of NEA reports and independent research publications. The second data set we expect to release later this year is the 2022 General Social Survey Arts Module. The NEA specifically ran this particular arts module so that we could better monitor and report to the public the extent to which arts participation in the United States has been affected uniquely by the COVID-19 pandemic. We wanted to be able to identify which population subgroups have not resumed arts activities and which may be underserved, having limited access, for example. We also chose to do this on the General Social Survey, which has been conducted since 1972 and is a leading source of data and information about societal changes and trends. We really encourage researchers to use these data sets and all the other data sets that are housed in NADAC to answer various questions about arts participation and engagement across populations in the United States. And you can also request funding for the NEA under our research grants programs to conduct secondary data analysis projects using these data sets. Last plug I'll mention before finishing is that NADAC welcomes proposals for researchers to deposit their raw and metadata from their studies into the archive for other researchers to use and analyze. A couple of our awardees to date have deposited their data in this archive. And next slide, please. So feel free to reach out if you have any follow-up questions. You can contact me directly at menzerm@arts.gov. Or you can reach out to NEA research grants at arts.gov. We're happy to put you in touch with NEA staff from other programs if you're interested in other grant programs that the NEA has. And there's also a link on this slide. Actually, there isn't a link on this slide, but I'll put it in the chat. A link to the NEA's grant guidelines, such as our Grants for Arts Projects program, our Challenge America program, and our Outturn program, as well as individual fellowships that we offer. And within each set of guidelines, there'll be contact information for program staff if you want to reach out to them directly. And so thank you very much. Turning it back over to you, Anya.
Thank you, Dr. Menzer. I now invite Dr. Novak-Leonard to present on her work related to SNAAP and other surveys developed under her previous NEA Research Lab Award.
First, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak in this forum. I'm Jennifer Novak-Leonard, Research Associate Professor at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, and as has already been mentioned, I serve as the Research Director for SNAAP, the Strategic National Arts Alumni Project. I've had the opportunity to be funded for a few different projects over the last number of years through the NEA. And as Melissa, I'm going to focus today's conversation on SNAAP. Certainly be happy to speak to any aspect of my prior experiences. In particular, through prior NEA Research Lab funding, created a primary data collection that is actually housed on NADAC, the Survey Perceptions of Creativity and Arts Participation. So the particular experience in primary data collection analysis and depositing the data with NADAC, and is available for broader public use. But today I'll turn my comments and attention to SNAAP. So I and collaborators currently are supported by an NEA research grant. And the goals of it are specifically to support a suite of reports examining the careers and lives of arts and design alumni, particularly with an emphasis on racial inclusion in higher education and the impacts of the pandemic. And I'm going to unpack that a bit as I proceed. And for these investigations into the careers and lives of arts and design alumni, we're utilizing data from the Strategic National Arts Alumni Project. And specifically, we're working with data I just collected late last calendar year for the 2022 survey administration. I've already used we because I'm working with a number of collaborators on this initiative. And so as Melissa had already mentioned about the structure of having key partners and collaborations, I have several key partners on this initiative. The nonprofit partner for this award is the Arts and Design Alumni Research Inc., which is a nonprofit that oversees the management of SNAAP, and that's conducted in partnership with the University of Texas at Austin, the College of Fine Arts there, and the College of Fine and Applied Arts at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. There's a core team there that I'm working with the nonprofit, Dr. Doug Dempster, Deanna Ibrahim, Dr. Angie Miller, and Leanne Scotto Adams. So it is a broad effort. Additionally, we are working with a key partner is Dr. Rachel Skaggs, who is the Lawrence and Isabel Barnett Assistant Professor of Arts Management at The Ohio State University. So we have a multi-institution collaborative team with the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign and myself serving as the primary awardee for this effort. So let's talk a little bit more about what is SNAAP. So SNAAP is a national survey of alumni of visual and performing arts design departments, schools and colleges. As we know, that education institutions are structured differently. And this includes arts administration and related programs. To date, SNAAP has worked with well over 300 institutions, which provide their alumni records to SNAAP and work in collaboration with the various approvals for SNAAP then to survey their alumni. This overall structure enables the linking of administrative data from the institutions, a broad set of institutional characteristics to be linked with the data, then along with the individual level responses. So it's quite a complex and full data set that provides a broad range of insights. SNAAP itself provides reports back to the institutions that participate in the surveying process on their own alumni data, and that's kept confidential with that institution. But what I'm going to focus on today is then the aggregation of that data that is then, with appropriate masking and data use approvals, is available to a broader range of researchers to help provide national insights and more systemic insights into the lives and careers of arts and design alumni. The survey itself collects a broad range of topics around the educational experiences and satisfaction that the individuals have and their insights on that. And it also collects a number of measures regarding their individuals' professional, creative, and personal lives to really understand both in terms of what was their educational experience when they were in the institution, what their lives and careers have been since, and then the different timestamps, what their current experiences are. Now SNAAP has had multiple prior administrations. Prior to a shift through 2021, it was housed and managed by the Indiana University Center for Post-Secondary Research, and they maintained the data up to 2017. And as I mentioned, was already home to SNAAP up until 2021. You see the left there, infographic that just indicates some of the stats that have come from the prior wave, and this specifically draws from a cycle done in 2015, 16, and 17, and that's available on the SNAAP website. So it has been fielded, the data for 2018 through 10, 11 through a 13 cycle, and 15 through 17 is currently with appropriate approvals available for broader research. And I encourage you to check out the listing on NADAC or directly with snaparts.org to understand how to pursue access to that data. But my focus here is on 2022 data, as a number of changes were undertaken with this survey administration. So as I mentioned, the NEA grant specifically is supporting the suite of reports to be able to look at this data. And specifically, the suite of reports includes the opportunity to provide extensive technical documentation on what has proceeded for the data collection administration process, and a series of topical reports that are data-driven from the 2022 data that are intended for a broad readership and are really gauged and designed to address very contemporary matters that are related to policy and other questions around the status of arts and design alumni, specifically this focus on alumni of post-secondary institutions. So I'd like to spend a moment here on talking about what all is going into the technical documentation. And the intended purpose of this expansive technical documentation process is to enable broad use of the data in the near future for extensive research. And I won't go into all the details of the process. Just to the right there, I've outlined some of the key elements in terms of the overall questionnaire design process, testing through cognitive interviews, pilot testing, certainly the statistics and processes regarding the overall survey administration, as well as some other reflective factors. But I want to highlight two areas in particular, which I think are germane and of interest to this audience. In terms of the questionnaire design, it had been 5 years since the last SNAAP survey was fielded. So there was an extensive and our world is a different place, extensive effort to help update, streamline, and expand the questions fielded on the SNAAP survey. It certainly maintains its focus on understanding career outcomes and the educational experiences. But in addition to that, it really helps kind of modernize and update how we're understanding and measuring work and employment. Pardon, somehow that advanced. Really additional elements of satisfaction with the educational institution, additional questions around student loans and financing for education, an expanded set of socio-demographic questions so we can better understand use of accommodations, expanded notions of best practices in terms of understanding gender expression and identity, just as a few examples. An additional module focused on our notions of sense of belonging to really even push beyond what we're able to examine in terms of matters and addressing diversity, equity, and inclusion, but to really understand our sense of belonging within the educational experience and in terms of workplace and occupation. And then expanded questions to understand implications of COVID-19, both in terms of impacts on training and education, acquisition of skill sets, and ways of working. Importantly, a significant change from prior administrations is that the 2022 administration used a sampling frame that has been derived from the National Center of Educational Statistics, IPEDS, data, the integrated post-secondary educational data system. Now, this differs from prior waves, which were primarily focused on a convenient sampling process. The goal for this, the sampling frame process, is so that in effort to be able to provide more generalizable insights for research going forward. And so we can also examine, hopefully in greater detail and granularity, and be able to make more generalizable statements about the research conducted with this data. As I mentioned, the survey administration did conclude in the late fall, it's just the tail end of the last calendar year. 120 post-secondary education institutions participated in the overall survey, 118 from within the United States, 2 additional institutions from Canada. It is the most diverse sample to date with SNAAP in terms of institutional types. And by that, I mean the Carnegie classifications in terms of the composition of Research 1 universities, special arts and design specialized universities, historically Black colleges and universities, community colleges, as well as tribal colleges. So we have 120 of those institutions. And then we've had over 61,000 alumni respondents. So it's a very substantial data set, and it's the largest data collection for a single year of SNAAP data. And additionally, as I already mentioned, stemming from that sampling frame process, we'll be documenting through the technical documentation weights that will be available for future use. As I mentioned, in addition to that extensive technical documentation, which is currently underway, and the data cleaning process, we're launching into a series of topical reports. And I'm going to share these with you as examples of key research questions and examples of research questions that can be examined with the SNAAP data, the current wave, and then also this can be extrapolated back with some of the prior waves. Specifically, I am working with Dr. Shanita Bigelow as a postdoctoral fellow to examine the current status of arts and design alumni in terms of career and outcomes and current employment. The acquisition of skill sets, both in terms of what was acquired during the educational experience in contrast to reflections and understanding of the youth within the current workplace. Examining what are alumni reflections on their educational experience, both in terms of activities they may have engaged with and perceptions and opinions of their higher educational experience. As well as looking at sense of belonging to understand the degree that individuals felt that within their educational experience and have that juxtaposed and in context also of perceptions, a sense of belonging within the current workplace. I also mentioned that Dr. Rachel Skaggs is a key partner in this effort, and she is leading research questions and examinations on the effects of COVID. And some of the research questions that are driving her reports are how have arts and design alumni employment income changed since the onset of COVID-19? To what extent and how have alumni deployed creativity, artistic skills, and unique perspectives in response to the challenges of COVID-19? And what, if any, new skills and education did alumni seek during this time? And where did they go to acquire these skills and this additional education? So these efforts are currently underway. The extensive technical documentation will be made publicly available later this year in hopes that it serves as an additional platform for research more broadly. As I had mentioned, there is an entry on NADAC for SNAAP. The prior year's data through 2017 can be requests for access, can be submitted to info@snaaparts.org. And I strongly encourage you to visit snaaparts.org generally, because there's a whole range of research reports, journal articles, and additional documentation on prior waves. I encourage you to check out and examine if it may be of use to you in your own research. I'll go ahead and pause there.
Thank you, Dr. Novak-Leonard. And we will now turn the presentation over to Dr. Mack, who will discuss her research based on the health and retirement study data.
Thank you, Anna. If you could see my slides, okay?
Yes, looks great.
Oh, wonderful. Okay. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be presenting to you today. So I'm Karen Mack. I'm a Senior Research Fellow in Epidemiology and Statistics at the University College London. So I'm going to be speaking about researching the arts in health using US population-based studies. There's a slight change in the topic. I hope that's okay. So as you know, there are various types of population-based surveys, including cohort study, panel data, retrospective study, cross-sectional study, and census data. So in the US, there is a range of secondary data sets, such as the General Social Survey and Health and Retirement Study. And these data sets track individuals over time and contain a very rich set of variables, such as participants, demographic backgrounds, education, employment, family, health, and engagement in the arts. And the size and scope of these data sets means that we can explore the association between arts and health after considering in wide-ranging social demographic factors, such as age, gender, ethnicity, and social status. We can also ask questions that have not been explored in the field of the arts and health previously. For example, we have demonstrated in projects, which I will show later, how arts and cultural engagement has a preventative association with depression incidents. With these rich data sets, we were also able to measure arts and cultural engagement in many different ways. For example, exploring the arts using an umbrella approach, incorporating all assets and activities related to arts and culture, or categorizing the activities into groups like active participation and receptive engagements. We've also analyzed specific activities such as reading for pleasure. So I'm going to share with you some of the key findings from our research. So one of the population groups that we're very interested in is children and young people. And using data from the panel study of income dynamics, we explored how arts engagement might influence flourishing, a positive mental health state in which individuals feel good and function well in individual and community life. And in this analysis, we found that amongst young adults aged 18 to 28, increases in arts engagement were associated with increases in flourishing over a period of 14 years. And the association was predominantly driven by increases in social well-being, meaning that young adults felt like they're an important part of a positive community, and smaller increases in psychological well-being, meaning that young adults felt increasing autonomy and personal growth. Now, this is supported by our study, by another of our study, that extracurricular arts activities are related to increased odds of reporting higher levels of later social supports from peers. This may be because these arts activities provide opportunities for social engagement, developing friendships, social skills, and also building a sense of community. And in addition to improvements in flourishing and social supports, we also found that more arts and cultural engagement was associated with fewer reportedly antisocial or criminalized behaviors, such as stealing, selling drugs, or seriously injuring others. And also, arts engagement was associated with better self-control scores and fewer positive perceptions of reportedly antisocial or criminalized behaviors concurrently and also longitudinally. The results were remarkably consistent across the two longitudinal cohorts of adolescents, where we've used the National Longitudinal Study of Adolescent to Adult Health, which is the EdHealth, and also the National Education Longitudinal Study of 1988. Despite differences in participant age, timescale, and measures of arts and cultural engagement and reportedly antisocial or criminalized behaviors between these two data sets. So now that EdHealth followed individuals from early adolescence into young adulthood, whereas NILF 88 focused on the teen years, this indicates that the potential benefits of arts and cultural engagement on antisocial or criminalized behaviors are not limited to childhood or early adolescence, but may also occur across this whole developmental period. Now, the negative correlation between arts and cultural engagement and antisocial behaviors may be related to how the arts is associated with externalizing behaviors. So using a different US data set, we found that children taking part in a higher number of extracurricular arts activities at age 10 or 11 were associated with fewer externalizing behaviors, such as hyperactivity or inattention at age 13 or 14. Now, these results were found even when taking account of demographic and socioeconomic factors, as well as factors relating to children's school and its level of overcrowding, ethnic composition, location, and safety of the area. However, unlike extracurricular activities, the same relationship was not found for in-school arts activities. So this suggests that the context and environments where children engage in the arts may influence their developmental behaviors differently. Now, in fact, this has been highlighted in one of our papers exploring over 130 active ingredients to understand what it is exactly in the activity that triggers mechanisms to take place and connect the arts to health. For example, the activity content or the atmosphere or environment of the activity. Now, this may explain why we found the association in extracurricular arts activities, but not in in-school art classes, because the components that make up of these activities may have different impacts on various outcomes. Another key focus of our project is healthy aging. Now, when using data from health and retirement study of over 12,000 older adults, we found that those who participated in local community arts groups such as choir, dancing, photography, theatre, or music group reported greater life satisfaction, positive effects, and perceived mastery 4 years later. Because this study, the HRS Health and Retirement Study, asked about the overall frequency of participation in these groups rather than frequency by the group type, we were unable to explore the different types of participatory arts engagement further. But it is quite likely that the art groups may offer different opportunities for things like cognitive stimulation, physical activities, social interactions, emotional bonding, collaborative learning, pursuit of collective goals, and developing self-esteem that may have that show how arts groups participation was related to well-being over a 4-year period. Now, although we couldn't look into each arts group type, we were able to explore other specific types of leisure activities and their impacts on mental well-being, such as depression. So using the same dataset, we found that other leisure activities such as baking or cooking, engaging in hobby or projects, going to club, and participating in organization are associated with lower odds of depression 2 years later. And many of these activities involve social interactions that can reduce loneliness and can be used to develop social identity, where people build a sense of who they are based on their group membership. And there is evidence showing that individuals with stronger social identities have lower rates of depression. And not only could the arts support older adults' mental well-being, they could also have the potential to support people with chronic pain who usually experience poorer well-being generally. Now, using the same data sets, this study explored the association between engagement in creative and community activities and physical and psychological well-being amongst those with chronic pain. And the study found that for adults, experiencing chronic pain for at least 2 years, engaging in these activities once a month or more was associated with fewer daily living difficulties. For example, bathing, eating, or taking medication. Now, for participants with moderate to severe chronic pain, engagement in these activities monthly or more was related with to a greater levels of life satisfaction. So this shows that arts do not just have preventative effects on mental well-being, but they also can help to manage and treat some of the symptoms for people who have health conditions. Now, the mechanisms underlying the associations between the arts and healthy aging are also worth investigating, particularly as some of our most recent work has found associations between older adults' engagement in leisure activities and their perception of aging, including how happy they are with their age, whether they have had to stop doing things they enjoy because of aging, and their satisfaction with aging. Now, following over 17,000 participants in data from health and retirement study, we found that greater engagement in activities was significantly associated with more positive perceptions of the aging process, both concurrently and longitudinally. Now, having positive self-perceptions of aging is very important to both physical and mental functioning amongst older people, because it has been shown to associate with longevity, functional health, cognitive function, psychological well-being, health behaviors, and the use of preventive health services. Now, given the health and well-being effects of the arts, it is clearly important that every person has access to them. Alongside our longitudinal research, we have been exploring these inequalities to identify predictors and patterns of arts engagement and understand what may be preventing people from engaging in the arts and cultural activities. So one of the most persistent factors is socio-demographic factors. We found that, for example, female, people of white ethnic backgrounds, those with high education level, and people with high social status, and also people who live in larger cities engage more in the arts. So a social gradient in arts and culture participation is very clearly shown. Now, one thing that I would like to draw your attention on is that people of ethnic minority backgrounds are actually less interested in attending in arts events than those who are white ethnic backgrounds. And this could be a result of the way in which arts events were defined. So it's limited to music, theatre, or dance performance, or art exhibitions. But it may also indicate that some ethnic or racial groups are less interested in attending arts events because of a lack of cultural equity, cultural relevance, interests, and also inequalities in access, and are therefore likely to contribute to racial or ethnic differences in arts engagement. Now, we also found that parental educational backgrounds can be a very persistent predictor of our engagement, suggesting that class of origin continues to matter throughout the lifespan and that childhood's exposure to the arts plays an important role. However, when we explored further how our childhood relationship with the arts could influence our later engagement using a British dataset, we found that school-based arts activities can actually remove the social gradient found in engagement among children, and that such gradient was only shown in outside of school. So what this is saying, or what this is showing, is that while children from poorer socioeconomic backgrounds tend to engage less outside of school, inside school this is equalized. I would like to finish my presentation by showing you our latest cross-country analysis, where we analyzed 5 datasets with 60 nations across the US, Europe, China, England, and Japan, on the levels of hobby engagement and amongst older adults aged 65 and older. Now, in this study, we found that not only there are differences within a country, inequalities in arts and cultural engagement can also be found on a country level. Particularly, people living in the US, China, and some parts in Europe, such as Spain and Italy, tend to have lower levels of hobby engagement compared to countries like Japan, Germany, and Denmark. Now, this suggests that our cultural behavior may also be influenced by our tradition, work culture, leisure definition, and national policy. And so it is very crucial to consider individual, social, and country level predictors to understand enablers and barriers to engagement, which could hopefully help improve arts engagement rates across the populations. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation. I will hand over to Anna.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mack. We're going to invite Dr. Elpus to take the floor and tell us about his work using the National Center for Education Statistics datasets. I think you need to unmute, Dr. Elpus. I think you muted.
Hi, how's that?
Excellent.
Wonderful. Okay, and you can see the slides.
Yes, we do.
Excellent. So as stated, my name is Ken Elpus. I am the principal investigator of the National Endowment for the Arts Research Lab here at the University of Maryland, which we call the Music and Arts Education Data Lab. You heard a little bit about that earlier from Dr. Menzer. And of course, we are funded by the National Endowment for the Arts. And I'm really grateful for that funding. And I also do want to let you know that I have lots of opinions, but the opinions that I express in this and any and all venues are mine and not necessarily the opinions of the National Endowment for the Arts. Before I get into 2 studies that I'd like to share with you today, I want to just sort of briefly talk about how, as an arts practitioner, I come to this work. The first is through some realizations as a practitioner. Being in a music education master's program every summer at Northwestern University, I became keenly aware of some of the deep thought in arts and arts education that had gone before me and made me realize that this particular area of inquiry had been a very serious place for deep thought. And Bennett Reamer, a philosopher with whom I became acquainted at Northwestern University, really encapsulated a lot of things that I thought as a high school choral director, which was where I originally come from in this work, and talks a lot about the importance of the musical experience. Other thinkers have thought deeply, as Bennett Reamer has, about the arts more broadly than just music. I enjoy the work of Elliot Eisner as well. He's the only arts educator ever to serve as the president of the American Educational Research Association. And in his 2002 book, he really suggests that the arts have very intrinsic artistic processes that are themselves complex cognitive modes of thought. And that while we as artists sometimes consider trying to justify our work through non-arts outcomes, maybe we should potentially think about what it is we actually learn within the arts and what the arts do for us intrinsic to them that are also important. So the overarching wonderment of my research is basically looking at the systematic differences that Dr. Mack was just alluding to, particularly aiming at school-based arts education. So what are these systematic differences between those students who do and do not elect music or arts education in secondary schools? Here in the United States, arts education is typically compulsory up until about 6th grade. It's the beginning of middle school, and then becomes almost universally elective. And there are some key population differences between students who do and do not elect to continue that art study beyond elementary school. So I typically look at this arts engagement at 3 points in the timeline. Before people elect to be in elective arts education, right? So checking out those antecedents or predictors, similarly to what Dr. Mack was just mentioning. Then really looking at some descriptive research on the demographics of the students that we do teach. So who is actually in our classrooms and who is teaching them. And then finally, once we understand what those systematic differences are between who we're reaching and who we're not reaching, making fair comparisons of the consequence or effects of arts education on students' lives, both educationally and otherwise. I do this work chiefly through the analyses of large administrative and governmental data sets, such as those available through NADAC. And I'm typically doing both descriptive and some advanced analytic techniques to sort of back into quasi-experimental research using either multi-level or fixed effects regression analyses and controlling for those pre-existing differences that we find in a descriptive work. So the first study I'd like to share with you is a study supported by the NEA called School Music and the Transition to College. This is work that I have previously done and is currently appears in the Journal of Research in Music Education. I'm going to warn you, I have some sound effects, so please do not get surprised if those actually come over the Zoom. They may or may not. It'll be fun to find out. So old thinking on music and arts education, particularly a lot of the advocacy efforts in the 90s, were sort of based on this notion that music makes kids better at school. And there's later research beyond the Catterall study that suggests this is not actually the case. And some of the work that suggests this is not the case has been done in more rigorous methods, either experimentally or quasi-experimentally, that suggests that maybe those early correlational studies were not actually as accurate as we might hope. So new thinking, right? Maybe music is making school better for kids. This is not something that's actually been empirically tested too intensely just yet. So what do I mean when I say making school better for kids? Well, we talk about the notion of school engagement in the educational literature, and that's the idea of how engaged, without using the word to define itself, students are in the things that make up their school. It's essentially their motivation to attend school, to participate in the activities that are made available to them, and then engage in both the peer and social structures that come with school. Typically, this construct is thought of in 3 different categories: behavioral engagement, that's participation and involvement in academic or social extracurricular activities. Things like emotional engagement, that's both positive and negative reactions that students have to their teachers, to their peers, to the actual academic work they're being asked to do, and school itself. And emotional engagement is presumed to create ties to the institution and then influence the willingness to do the work of school. And then, of course, cognitive engagement. This is the idea of investment, incorporating students' thoughtfulness and willingness to exert the effort actually necessary to comprehend the complex ideas that they're being presented with in their schooling. So the thought is that school engagement is an important educational construct because it's related to academic outcomes. There is some research to suggest this is in fact the case. When we talk about academic outcomes, one of the most salient ones is the notion of school persistence. That's not dropping out, or in really more current parlance, being pushed out of school. And then, of course, continuing on into post-secondary education. So these pathways are pretty well established in some previous literature. What's maybe not so clear is whether music education actually has a pathway through school engagement to things like school persistence. Of course, this wouldn't be a fair comparison unless you control for covariates. We're actually not ready to test this full model yet because we still don't know if there is actually a pathway from music education directly to school persistence. And so the present study that I'm going to share with you actually looks for this link because prior work has been inconclusive. So the purpose of the study that we're going to talk about right now is just to explore this transition from secondary to post-secondary schooling for a nationally representative cohort of American music and non-music students, wondering how successful progress through the education system and participation in college varies between high school music and non-music students in terms of the selectivity ranking of the colleges that students apply to, so how high they're aiming. And then Also the selectivity rankings of the colleges they attend, where they actually get, whether or not they receive scholarships or grants to help the affordability of those colleges. And then finally, because this is particularly important to the broader school enterprise, whether art students are more or less likely to elect majors in the STEM fields. For those of you unfamiliar with the jargon, that's science, technology, engineering, and math, or of course the visual and performing arts fields, which I'm personally much more interested in. This particular data set that I use for this study is the High School Longitudinal Study of 2009, a longitudinal study of education conducted by the National Center of Education and Statistics, which is part of the U.S. Department of Federal Education. At the time of this talk, it is the most recent longitudinal study of secondary and post-secondary education, sampled about 25,000 students who were ninth graders in the 2008-2009 school year. The modal sample member of this group graduated high school in 2013. Of course, not everyone graduates in exactly 4 years. I will sometimes refer to these students as the class of 2013, but just so we know for accuracy, that's not entirely accurate for 100% of the students. Identified music students by analyzing their complete high school transcripts, which are available not in the public use, but in the restricted use data. We can talk about access to that later. And then their post-secondary data was from a follow-up survey wave that was conducted in 2016-2017. This wave is before the modal sample member would have graduated from college. They would only have been in college for about 2 or 3 years. So we can't observe post-secondary degree attainment. If you're really interested in this cohort of music students, I have another study with my colleague Carlos Abril from the University of Miami, where we talk about all the descriptive statistics you could ever want to know about this particular cohort of music students. The short answer is they tend to be richer and whiter than the non-music students in this cohort. For this particular study, we use logistic regression to analyze outcomes that are binary. That's whether you did or did not do something. We use ordinal logistic regression, which is an extension of logistic regression, to look at those outcomes that aren't necessarily continuous, but are clearly some higher than others. For example, college selectivity. And then we sort of interpret it with marginal effects. In terms of our covariates, based on work similar to that Dr. Mack shared, there are lots of reasons we know that just a straight up comparison between music and non-music students is not a fair comparison. So here are the things we can observe to try to make those fair comparisons. Obviously, race and ethnicity, hugely important here in the US context. Birth assigned sex, federal government only asks students about birth assigned sex. They do not ask about gender identity. They can ask that of adults. We talk about that later if you're interested. Family socioeconomic status, family composition, that's a 1-parent or 2-parent home, for example. Parental level of education, which as you saw earlier is salient for arts participation. Whether the student was born here in the United States, whether the student speaks English as their first language, what their prior academic achievement was before high school, which we have available to us through 8th grade math grades, whether or not the student is an athlete, that's going to come back to be interesting later, and then the hours per week that the student spends in extracurricular activities. If you are super interested in this study, the full paper is available here at this QR code. I'm going to give you exactly 5 seconds to scan it, but you can also go to ter.ps/JRME College, that's terps/JRME College, to find that paper. All right, getting right into the results. Was music study related to the likelihood of a student ever dropping out or being pushed out of high school? Not. Likelihood of applying to college? No. Selectivity of the college the student applied to? No. Likelihood of attending any college? Sadly, no. Selectivity of the college attended? No. Likelihood of getting a scholarship or a grant? No. Likelihood of majoring in an arts field? Yes. Likelihood of majoring in a STEM field? No. So of all of these outcomes that we looked at, once you control for the covariates that we can see that clearly do differentiate music and non-music students, we see that the only thing that music study in school is related to was whether or not that student would major in a STEM field. Now, when I say they're not related, that means there's no positive or negative relationship. That means that music students, even though they decided to take a music class instead of, for example, taking an extra math class, were not disadvantaged in any of these matters. They are statistically indistinguishable from their similar peers, and that's a really important finding. In terms of this majoring in an arts field, out to 3 decimal places, music student probability was about 5.4%. That's roughly an 80% increase in the probability that a non-music student would major in an arts field. So just over 1 in 20 of our high school music students do go on to continue arts study as their major in college. That's a super important finding, and I'm really excited to find out about that. just in case you're curious about the athletes, was being an athlete related. Now, I used athletics as a control variable, but a sport researcher might have done that as their variable of interest. So just in case you're interested, likelihood of ever dropping out of high school, no. Likelihood of applying to college, yes. Selectivity of the colleges they aimed for, yes. Likelihood of attending college, yes. Selectivity of the college attended, yes. Likelihood of getting that scholarship that they all thought they were going to get, no. It's really hard to get an athletic scholarship. For example, here at the University of Maryland, we have 30,000 undergraduate students and only 500 of them are on an athletic scholarship. That is a pipe dream for most students. Likelihood of majoring in an arts field is related, but it's related in a negative direction. If you were an athlete, you were less likely to major in the arts. Likelihood of majoring in a STEM field, unrelated. So, conclusions for this particular study, all is not necessarily lost for this particular theory, but it does need some refinement. One important really limitation here is that when you look at a broad view using national data, the definition of what music education is becomes fuzzy and variable across school contexts. And so we do need a little bit more on the ground research. So these also might not be the correct outcomes to measure for this chain. There could be a cohort effect going on here. And it may be smarter to focus on the left side of the chain to see if music education is related to school engagement, because we know school engagement is related to those other outcomes. As I said earlier, music students were not disadvantaged relative to their non-music peers. And so the big upshot from this study is no guidance counselor or adult advising a high schooler should ever caution against taking music to improve a student's chances of getting into a good college, right? They're not disadvantaged, so that scarce use of time is perfectly beneficial investment for them. Second study I'm going to go through pretty quickly as well. It's actually a study that I conducted as a collaborator with one of my recent doctoral alums, just earned her PhD in the Music and Arts Education Data Lab. Her name's Allison Durbin. She's really interested in parents' arts consumption and how that was related to their children's musical education. So parents' arts consumption as adults related to whether they would provision their students or their children arts education students. We based this on the concerted cultivation theory of Annette Leroux, which basically says that parents who are interested in engaging in the arts with their children generally have all of these various and sundry resources at their disposal that might make their children more likely to engage in the arts. It's a really interesting book. I highly recommend you read it. It's called Concerted Cultivation. We wanted to know the extent that parent attendance at live music, theater, or dance was related to their child being involved in school-based music. We used the Survey of Public Participation in the Arts, also available on NADAC. This is a periodic data collection of the NEA conducted by the Census Bureau, as Melissa said earlier. It is available in NADAC, and there are 35,000 sample members. Actually, I think in 2017, that number might be wrong. Maybe 17,000 in 2017 off the top of my head. And then, of course, we used the complex survey weights. We did liminar analyses, though, to the 683 respondents who were parents or guardians of school-aged children, and also answered both the relevant sort of core and modules. There's a two sort of stage design. Not every SPPA respondent sees the full survey. So we were obviously limited to those observations for which we had data. Covariates we used similar to what we are observing in the education data: race, ethnicity, educational attainment, household income, and then the location, metropolitan area. This, of course, is informed by Leroux's work. If you're really super interested in the logistic regression model, that's what it is. Real quick tour through the results. If the child being enrolled in a school-based music and arts program, if the parent guardian attended a live music or performance in the last 12 months, those children were almost 2 times more likely than children whose parents were not engaged in live music performance attendance to be in a school music or arts program. However, race was linked, right? So parents who were Black or African American, their children were 43% less likely to be engaged in their school's music and arts programs. In terms of education, we see similar results to what Dr. Mack mentioned earlier, right? Students whose parents had a graduate degree were 421% more likely than students whose parents had not earned a graduate degree or had less than a high school diploma to be engaged in the arts. We find a relationship for extracurricular music with parental live music attendance. We also find a similar decrease in likelihood for children being in extracurricular music and arts programs if their parents were Black or African American. Although we do actually interestingly see that compared to students without a high school diploma, earning that high school diploma does actually make parents earning a high school diploma does make children more likely to participate in extracurricular music and arts programs, suggesting there may be some equity issues of extracurricular programs that are worthy of further investigation. And then students who came from two-parent households were about 90% more likely to be enrolled in out-of-school music or arts programs. So again, that's probably having to do with family resources, things like being able to get a child to those particular experiences. So again, we see these relationships with parental education, not only on their own arts participation, but also on the participation of their children. And that's a really important element, but also parents' arts consumption is related to whether or not children would be engaged in either in-school or out-of-school arts experiences. So other work in the Mad Lab, as Melissa mentioned earlier, we are in the middle of our survey development and validation process for the National Study of Arts Education. We've got lots of papers coming out using available data and a robust cohort of 8 graduate students, 3 of whom just earned their doctoral degrees. I will turn it over. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Elpus. I love the special effects, by the way. And we are now going to transition back to Dr. Menzer for a panel discussion, a quick one probably, about 10 minutes.
Great. Thank you so much, everybody, for those wonderful presentations. And to echo Anya, thank you for the sound effects, Ken. I felt like I was part of a game show.
Excellent.
So the work that all of our presenters have shared so far really show the breadth and depth of research on how arts are or are not related to various sectors such as education, health and well-being, and labor and the economy, as well as the complexity of how the data can be organized and analyzed, and different ways that the arts in and of itself can be defined. So before we open up the floor with the Q&A with the audience, I wanted to pose a couple of questions for our guest speakers. And those questions are, so we know that it can be rewarding and also challenging to work with large-scale data sets. What are some of the successes and challenges you have experienced working with these data sets and or working with data repositories to analyze data? What advice do you have for researchers who are thinking about doing a project studying the arts and culture with secondary data? And what advice do you have for researchers who are interested or thinking about applying for funding from the NEA or any other funding agency for the first time, either through an affiliated organization or as a partner to another organization? And so, in other words, what do you wish you knew before you applied for funding? And so I'd like to start with Jennifer, if you don't mind. Rewards, challenges, advice for researchers, and advice for applicants who are applying for funding.
Well, in terms of rewards, in particular, I want to harken back to use of the survey of public participation in the arts. Having that available through NADAC and structured in the way that it has been makes it much more straightforward to be able to link that to the current population survey and to link it to really think about how can you even further leverage that data in context of additional measures when you're thinking about that. So my experience with NADAC has been really strong. I really appreciate that in particular. I think it's a great vehicle for individuals who are looking to be able to link that and understand the data in context of other things. Challenges with data repositories, I think there's oftentimes the desire to have more, right? What else could there be? Better understanding that. So really understanding, thinking through kind of what's there, the interpretation of, I think Dr. Mack had commented on this as well. It's like, how are the measures being utilized? So bringing a critical eye to that as we understand the definitions, shifting for our understanding of arts and culture as we proceed in our daily lives is important, in understanding the definitions of what's there. I very briefly wanted to comment on kind of what I wish I knew in advance. Certainly the preparation takes some time, because really ensuring that your proposal is sufficiently motivated, contextualized within the literature, really is shaped to be operational, is that takes a good bit of time, as well as through the administrative factors that you may be working through your university or institution, particularly if there's collaboration. So allow yourself time and some bandwidth to be able to shape the project itself and to have it, to usher it through the pathways that you need to administratively. And I did want to comment that the NEA staff has been, in my experience, extremely accommodating and open to questions, which isn't something I necessarily knew at the forefront to be able to approach with questions, either through data structures or about the application process. So they're approachable and super helpful and wonderful. So thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Yes, please do come to us with questions and comments about the awards programs that we have. So I'd like to turn it now to Karen. Do you have anything you'd like to add, or any different experiences that you'd like to share?
I guess I could bring into some of my experience when analyzing US data sets. So most of the work that I've presented are from my colleagues, Dr. Jaspo. Unfortunately, she can't be here with us because she's in Japan at the moment. So I have some limited experience analyzing US data, but I do have experience analyzing British cohort data sets. And I think one of the things that I find it quite one of the good things about it is that we can do some cross-country comparison analysis between different countries, and I think that would be very beneficial, particularly in understanding whether the impacts of the arts are universal across different countries and cultures, and also to identify key enablers and barriers to engagements. So what works in the UK that might not have worked in the US, or the other way around. And I think it would also be quite interesting to work on the data harmonization between different data sets across countries, so that would give us a better idea about the engagement rate, particularly in different countries. So then we know how which populations seem to be engaging more in the arts compared to others. So that could be quite helpful.
Thank you, Karen.
Thank you.
And lastly, Kenneth, any successes, challenges, advice?
So I do a lot of this work, and so I don't want to dwell on things that might be successes, because it's challenging and it's hard, but it is extremely worthwhile. So I'll do advice, right, from having done this now for the better part of a decade. When you are doing secondary data analysis, particularly for arts and arts education questions, which were almost never the original intent of the principal investigator who collected the data that you are analyzing, it's really important to have a question motivating your research before you find the data. Because it's very easy to sort of like root around in a data set and maybe do a bunch of exploratory analysis and then come up with a question that you found an answer to that may or may not be what you would have answered if you had a real research motivation and went to find data that would support a version of that question. Which brings me to my second piece of advice, which is you cannot let the perfect be the enemy of the good. None of these data sets have exactly the measures that we want of exactly the populations that we want, but that doesn't mean they cannot be used to answer really important questions in the arts and arts education. So coming up with the question first, finding the data later, and then being willing to understand the trade-offs that you have to make. And also recognizing that one of the trade-offs that you gain is, I would never be able to survey 25,000 students across the United States in 850 schools, right? I'm fresh out of $100 million to do that study. And I imagine so is the National Endowment for the Arts. So it's good that we have NCES who can collect that data for us and who can, be a partner with us in collecting data that then we can ask meaningful questions of. In terms of advice for applicants, my strongest suggestion would be to make sure that you have an arts insider on your research team. The strongest applications that I have seen when I've been a reviewer, and I have not been a reviewer for the NEA, but I have been a reviewer for other grant organizations that have arts related research questions and applications come to them. Oftentimes arts outsiders just sort of treat the arts as a black box that is a universal good, Whereas arts insiders know there are things like better and worse pedagogy of the arts, or more and less, what's the word, sort of immersive experiences in the arts. And that these theoretically should not have all the same outcomes. And arts insiders very rarely treat the arts and arts education like a black box, but arts outsiders sometimes do, and that comes through in your application. So if you are a sociologist, an economist, a psychologist looking at doing this work, if you're on a university campus, there is research being done in the arts departments on your campus. Go find some of those people who can be on your team and provide that needed insider perspective that can then balance perhaps your quantitative chops or something like that.
Great, thank you so much. All really helpful advice, all really helpful feedback. I hope that all of our attendees learn a lot from all of these presentations and explore the data sets that they've used. Lynette, I was gonna turn it over to you for the last part of the session.
Perfect. We do have one question in the chat, but I'm also going to take moderator privilege and ask a question because I can't put it in the Q&A box. And this is specifically for Ken. And you may have mentioned it, but I may have been too both surprised by your sound effects and enthralled by them, as well as shocked by your findings. But do you have any theories as to why athletics has such a strong predictive power compared to music?
So I'm not a sport researcher, so there's probably a deeply theorized literature that I'm unaware of that could answer that question better than I could. But I will say, from my athletics outsider perspective, I like cheer for my kids' sports games. They manage to throw and hit balls, and I cannot do that. I think it has to do with sort of the package that a student sends to an admissions office. And I also think it has to do with socialization. I think that athletes in the United States, particularly high school athletes, are probably not subject to what we sometimes call in the education literature undermatching, which is where students don't apply at more selective colleges because they think they are not suited for those colleges, right? And then there's undermatching related to race and to socioeconomic economic status, where you see people think more poorly of their achievement than is warranted. My suspicion is that athletes don't have that, right? That they probably think like, yeah, I can go to that Big 10 school. I'm going to be one of those 500 people out of 30,000 that get the athletic scholarship. And so they just apply and then they get accepted. Remembering that the controls included things like GPA and SAT scores, right? So when we're making those comparisons, it's that the music students were not getting into schools more selective than their GPA and SAT scores would have predicted. They were getting into schools that their GPA and SAT scores would have predicted. So there's an undermatching situation going on there, that they're not trying hard enough. That's just speculation.
Interesting. No, I saw that. I was hoping that you would show very similar results for athletics and music, but anyway, the question. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I don't want to get into the weeds. We can talk about it later.
Okay. The question that a real actual attendee wanted to ask, and I think that this is for Melissa, but I think anybody actually could answer it, is can more be said about the project ideas and or application strategies for first-time applicants versus returning applicants?
So why don't I start with some of the NEA specific stuff, and then if anyone else has anything else that they'd like to share, they can contribute. So for the research awards programs here at the Arts Endowment, we have in our guidelines, we have a section called applicant resources or frequently asked questions. And in there's a whole bunch of resources that applicants can use. So for example, there's an online tutorial for the grant application form. There's a link to our research agenda, which I encourage you to take a look at. There's also sample narratives that you can look at specifically from our research grants in the arts program. These are actual applications that have been submitted to the NEA and funded, and so you can see how they've organized their application. All of our grantees are required to submit a final paper, and many of these papers are available on our website. And so when you're looking at these papers, you can kind of think of them as like the finished product of a grant, or the past tense of the grant, whereas an application is really about the future tense of the award or the project. So you're looking in the future, this is what you want to do, but the actual paper itself is then, this is what you did, and this is why you did it, and this is what you found, and how that impacts practice and research. We also have a list of publicly available data sources. NADAC is part of that package. And we also are very much available to you. If you have questions, comments, if you're not sure what something means, just reach out. We have a very dedicated staff that are committed to answering your questions as best we can and helping you through the process of applying. So that I'll stop there. But if there's anything other people want to share, please feel free.
I just want to, I think the notion is that the approach is similar, whether you're a first-time applicant or you've had the opportunity to be funded previously. But hearkening on what my colleagues have said is having that specific and sufficiently narrow research questions, sufficiently motivated and contextualized an examination of data that can sufficiently answer that, but really thinking that through in advance of the proposal, so that you can ensure that if it's funded, it can be operationalized, be able to see that through. And I think that's a strategy that I've adopted on the multiple opportunities I've had to be funded with support from the National Endowment for the Arts.
Okay, looks like there's one more question, and we have time for just about one more question. So are any of you aware of any grants available for significant renovations for art/design programs at state schools?
I personally am not aware of this. Generally speaking, most of the NEA programs do not allow for renovations as part of the project activities. But I guess it really depends on what is meant by renovation. And so I encourage you to this particular person to take a look at our guidelines for all of our grant programs here at the Arts Endowment to see if there's a fit for that, and potentially reach out to our design staff about that. They might have some more resources for this type of question.
I don't know if it's true for the arts, but I know that like the National Science Foundation and National Institutes of Health often have infrastructure grants that are specifically designed toward building some piece of the support system for a type of research or a project. That I don't know if they have that kind of thing specifically for renovations and for arts in general, but that might be a place to think about looking. And with that, I'm going to say thank you all. This was a fascinating webinar. I learned a ton, and I wish that I had more time to do research, because now I want to look at stuff related to all of your topics. But thank you so much. And we will make the slides, as Anya said, slides and recording available for this webinar on the NADAC website in about a week or two. And we look forward to later NADAC webinars. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye.